Hey everyone, today I wanted to talk about the new killer of Kaneki, and the many issues he seems to have been causing. This is a release that from the get-go reminds me greatly of Wesker and his release. If you weren't around the time when Wesker came out, almost every game was Wesker, and in a similar way the queue times had also grown to be much longer. I'm not sure if you found this too, but I know my queue times personally for Killer have been a whole lot longer because everybody wants to play Kaneki, and this is because he's a ton of fun. I think this is the part of him that's not really up for debate. People are having a lot of fun with him, and I know I definitely am too. I want to jump in right away to what I think is the main problem with Kaneki at the moment, and that's the fact that he's far too easy to play. I actually want to draw a parallel between him and Freddy. That might seem like a weird parallel, but hear me out. Back in the day, in 2019 to early 2020, Freddy was actually one of the strongest killers in the game, and he was one of the strongest more widely for the greater player base because he was so easy to play. Unlike characters like Nurse or Spirit, which may require you to develop some varying skills, when it came to Freddy, it was just insanely easy. He could rely on his Forever Freddy strategy, he had inbuilt passive help with the dream world, and so on. This is a not too dissimilar state to where Kaneki is in at the moment. Sure, he's strong, but he's also very easy to play. He can bound around the map with ease, getting from gen to gen incredibly quickly. He can get an insanely easy first hit with his sort of lock-on he does. And he does have some elements of sort of passive map control due to his deep wounds. This is all only really accentuated if you decide to run certain perks that actually buff or work really well for him. For example, aura perks work really well for Kaneki, vault speed perks too really help to work against any of your cooldowns, and of course just general gen regression perks make it incredibly difficult for survivors to counter you. So let's look at his issues one by one. I think the first and the biggest issue people have with Kaneki, especially when facing him, is they feel that the lock-on or initial attack he can do is far too strong. And this I have to agree with. I want you to check out this background footage here and see me bound across almost the entire length of the map in probably about under 10 seconds and lock onto someone from a ridiculously far away point. Tell me that's fair. That's not alright. That's sort of ridiculous. No other killer in the game can realistically do that. Nurse can't even do that. Blade can't even do that really. At least he can't get over there and apply deep wound in such a short amount of time. It's not a possible thing for any other killer in the game. Yet Kaneki can do it with incredible ease, and he doesn't even really have to aim. You could do this accidentally even. The other way this ability is really janky is that it allows you to actually damage people on other floors, which is just ridiculous in my opinion. Take this moment here on Red Forest where I just grabbed this person above me on a generator. That's insane, no? Once again, who else can realistically do this aside Nurse? And even then, she doesn't apply deep wound as well. I think why this is so frustrating on the survivor side as well is that there's not really a way to dodge it. You can get hit by this thing around corners from a really long range, from different floors, from just about anywhere, and I think that's why it's so frustrating. And from the killer perspective, a lot of these times it doesn't even look like the hit connects, but just because you get those little teeth marks appear on the screen, it works out. The reason why this hit is so frustrating for the survivors is because it doesn't feel like there's a valid way to actually counter it, I think. There's no way really to stop him from getting that initial hit, aside just getting lucky and the game saying, oh no, that's not quite the right angle. But this rarely happens, because all Kaneki really needs to be doing is vaguely looking at you, or even looking at you for a brief moment as he passes you or something. Equally, I don't know how they can realistically change this. Maybe they can narrow the active range down, maybe it can only be sort of directly in front of you or something, but still have a vague lock-on. Because I remember they said in the stream that they didn't decide to do a skill shot, which would have been a shot that requires you to be very accurate, presumably, because this would have been too hard for console players, for example, who can't turn especially quickly in all instances. However, I do think this needs to be toned down at least a little bit, because it's just so frustrating. Maybe even a reduced range or something like that for this hit, something that requires you to be a bit closer or to have a very clear line of sight, or just something like that, I think. Maybe adjust the hitboxes for it in some way. The other reason it's so frustrating, I think, is because it also puts you into deep wound, and he can do this just by bounding once and then grabbing you. It's a very simple thing to apply. This means not all too dissimilar from a character like Legion, say, he can apply deep wound with incredible ease and without much thought at all. Again, going back to Freddy, people didn't like him in his Forever Freddy state because a lot of his abilities or things that made him strong were things that he didn't have much influence over even. They were just passive things, or they were things that worked for him. It's the same reason people didn't like the Maid for this meta, for example, especially on the killer side, because it didn't feel deserved. The survivor hadn't done anything skillful or hadn't used the perk well. It was just a passive 3% bonus to move speed. It feels like a similar thing here. The Kaneki getting that initial hit just doesn't feel especially skillful. Maybe a good way to change this would be to make it so he actually has to have a complete line of sight or a complete clear path from where he's standing to where the survivor's standing. So if he has to grab them and pull them in to bite them, there needs to be no obstacles in the way, so you can't sort of do it through a wall or over a pallet, because you'll pull yourself toward them, but then you'll stop as far as you get before hitting something. So say they're over a window or something, you pull yourself forward and you just hit the window, you can't bite them. Or a similar idea over a low clearance wall. Maybe that would be a good way to do this. Or simply shorten the range, narrow the hitbox in general, or narrow the indicator range, I think would be a good idea too. To move on to some of the other issues mentioned, I do think some of these issues supposedly are things that actually don't really need to be addressed. For example, the whole thing that he can get around the map too quickly, I actually don't think is much of an issue, because this more just feels like it's his power. Lots of characters are actually capable of getting around the map pretty quickly. Maybe not quite as fast as Kaneki, but there are still plenty who can do it. This I think is fine, and I think this is where they need to be very careful when changing him, because I think if you change too much of his movement, or you try and restrict it, or you alter it too much, you remove some of the sliding, or you remove the distance he can go, for example, he's just going to become frustrating. I think he's actually fine in this aspect. He is strong, but I think it's fine for him to be this strong too. At the moment, that aspect of his power is just fine, although it is very powerful. One element that could be changed that is also related to his lock-on is the deep wound application. This could possibly be removed in some aspect, or removed in some instances. Maybe it can only apply when you first enter your sort of rage or empowered mode, I forget what it's called, but when you go and spew out the tentacles. Yeah. Maybe it should only apply to the survivor you do that on, and not all of the ones after that as well, because it can feel a bit too excessive, and it ends up working against a lot of survivor perks that would get them out of a number of situations they can fall into. It also counters really strong perks like Dead Hard without even really trying. There's been a lot of situations where I've been facing survivors, they've tried to Dead Hard against me and they just can't, because they're pretty much always deep wounded when in a chase. Maybe instead of applying deep wound, it could opt for a different kind of effect, maybe something like the broken status, or even hemorrhage, or some other sort of thing. It just feels like applying deep wound in this instance is far too strong, not only because of how easy it is to do, but also because of the knock-on effects it has for the game and how it slows it down overall. I feel like Kaneki doesn't really need that inbuilt slowdown. He's easily capable of moving around the map and applying pressure purely with his movement ability. I think he just doesn't need the deep wounds. Overall, I do want this video to come off as positive, because I think this character is incredibly fun, and I also think he's incredibly fun to face as well. well. I think at the moment it's a bit tough to see that as on the survivor side due to some of these issues, but I think he is very fun to play against. When I faced Kanekis who are getting into chase with me and they're not applying deep wounds so much, for example, it's really fun. It can be a really fun character to play against. I just think there's some issues that are causing a lot of upset, and also the fact that he's appearing so much. I think it's one of those things, it's just frustrating to see the same character over and over again, even if it's a brand new character. It's the whole Wesker effect, right? Back on his release too. Most people love the guy, but he was appearing every game for months. It became tiring. Overall though, I think Kaneki is a really good addition to the game. I think it's really good how he's sort of shaking the meta up a bit as well. In his current state, I would genuinely make an argument on some maps, maybe not on all of the maps, but on some maps, I do think he's debatably the strongest killer currently in the game, even surpassing Nurse. Maybe a bold statement, but I think in some cases he's definitely stronger. This to me is really interesting. I don't think we've had a character sort of get close to the S tier since Blight, I would argue. It depends of course how you separate these tiers, but if we're talking about like really top tier characters, it's been Nurse and Blight for a long time now, with Spirit falling down a bit, Wesker maybe going up there on occasion, but in general it's been Nurse and Blight for a very long time. So having Kaneki up there now too, and having 3 characters sort of alternating, I think is a lot more interesting. And honestly, it's just a really welcome meta shift, because I think what's so great about Kaneki is not only is he really strong, which is great, I think it's good to add strong characters sometimes, as well as more balanced or even ones, more moderate ones, but he's also a lot of fun, which I think is the key thing when creating one of the top tier characters, is you want them to be strong, but you also want them to be fun, which I think is the reason why people didn't like when Freddy was top tier, for example, because he just wasn't fun to face. He was strong and he was too easy to play. It's a similar thing to the issues people are currently having with Kaneki. I hope they can change a few things about him, but overall I think he's a really great addition. Let me know your thoughts as well. Thanks for watching, and goodbye.